Raise your voices, raise your glass high. Welcome to the Drink O'Clock Podcast. Let's dive. Oh, grab an old fashioned and join the fray. Raise your spirits, let the music play. From the corner pub to the dance hall floor. Drink O'Clock Podcast, we're ready for more.
I'm so used to starting my podcast with Thirsty Thursday, so that like that, and most of the time I didn't even release the well, no, that's a lie. I release the episodes on Thursdays typically, but it's weird when you record so long on a specific day and then you switch. It's like, especially because it's the weekend, right? It's Friday, so it's I'll be actually drinking a little bit today. Normally I don't drink anymore during the week. And I've noticed my episodes tend to be a little bit better because I'm not an idiot by the end. But this is the Drink Clock Podcast. My name's Rob Valincius, and I have the pleasure of having with me Tyler Kania. Kania?
Kania.
Kania. Hold on one sec.
Like he's outside our window, so he's doing the neighbors. So I don't know if you want to send him a text or.
That my grass guy decided to start cutting the grass today. Literally
I'm just letting you know.
right now. So the wifey's like, just so you know, and I'm like, great. Hopefully, it doesn't. I don't think the mic will pick up on it, but who fucking knows at this point. But Kania, you said?
Kania.
Kania.
Yep.
Now you wrote a memoir called "The Maniac with No Knees," and that's about your journey as a bipolar rugby player. Welcome to the show, brother.
Thanks for having me.
So I definitely wanted you to have you on because I have bipolar that runs in my family. I don't have it, but I grew up with it. My stepdad has it pretty bad, and my stepmom, who passed away last year, had it pretty bad. So we went through the manic episodes and the crazy shit that goes along with bipolar. Because my stepdad was always good with. He always worked. He always did his thing, but he had a horrible thing happen with his dad and his brother, and around the holidays he would decide to just not take his medication, and then before you know it, he's acting crazy. He's having seizures because he just stopped taking his seizure meds because once you're on the bipolar medicine, then they also want you to take anti-seizure meds so that you don't get seizures from it, and it's. I grew up with it, so I understand probably a little bit more than the average person. Not as much as someone that actually has it. So I was intrigued getting you on the show. But talk a little bit about your early life growing up and eventually kind of what led you, I know you're big into rugby. I know that's why we didn't record yesterday. So talk a little bit about what got you into your love of rugby and all that.
Yeah, sure. Well, I grew up in Columbia, Connecticut. It's a small rural farm town where, the only restaurant in town is at the car dealership. I grew up pretty wealthy, white, educated, nuclear family, a lot of property. My older brother was, a genius. He, won the state geography bee in fourth grade and got a perfect score on the reading and writing on his SATs. He's a lawyer now. I used to joke that, he could read a novel in one trip to the toilet. But I wasn't like that at all. I was into sports, football, baseball, basketball, swimming, track, golf, pretty much anything really. Football was my main sport for a while in high school. We didn't have a high school in our town, so I went to school in this inner city that was dubbed Heroin Town, USA by 60 Minutes.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, it was the lowest ranked high school in the state of Connecticut. More Spanish speakers than English speakers. We had a daycare for the students' kids. But I really learned a lot there. I might not have had great college placement resources or anything like that, but I learned about cultures and I learned about people that had less than I did and people that are immigrants. So I think, I learned a lot more about the world there than, most people would learn at like a expensive prep school or something. I was the captain of the football team. I was a safety, a long snapper, and a backup running back. Um, Defense was
That's a
kind of
hell of a skill
my,
set, dude.
yeah, yeah. Well, I didn't actually hit my growth spurt until college. So like my freshman year, I was like, how can I get on the field? And I just got obsessed with long snapping. And as it turns out, long snapping is the same motion really as like tossing a rugby ball. So in college, I had always wanted to play rugby, and we tried to form a team when I was in high school, but there was no youth rugby east of the Connecticut River up until recently. But my dad always played, so I had a ball around the house. And so, when I got to college, I could have, played at like a D3 football school, but, I knew that my skill set was better for other sports, so I gave rugby a shot. And, the first drill I was ever in, um, I pulled off this slick behind the back pass, and the guy scored, and everyone was yelling at me for doing some showboat stuff. And I was like, wow, I think I just found my sport. And, and so, I became the starting fly half, which is like quarterback in rugby. I call the plays, do the kicking, the play calling, passing, everything. And we won 3 championships in college. I was selected to, the conference all-star team every year and was MVP of the Connecticut Cup tournament. And after the tournament, this head coach of a premier rugby team recruited me to play on his sevens rugby team. And, that was my first exposure to playing alongside guys that were like on Team USA or, had represented countries like Fiji, from Australia or Scotland. And I could play with them. It was a speed adjustment at first, definitely. But, I had the dexterity to pass and kick with anybody. But then when I was 24, I ruptured my patellar tendon for the first time. It's a pretty rare injury. It happens once for every 147,000 human years. And I'll later do it a second time, which has odds that are like discovering life on other planets. Um,
Jesus, dude. I tore my ACL, so I mean, I know it's not. I don't think it's as bad as the patellar, but I gotta tell you, it fucking sucks. So I feel your pain, and I can only
yeah,
imagine doing it twice. Um, but before you get into this, though, I do want to ask
yeah,
you: can you explain to my viewers? Because I gotta tell you, I don't know shit about rugby. It's fun to watch, but I don't know shit. Can you just kind of give us a breakdown of like what rugby actually is? It's
yeah.
kind of like football, kind of with mixed with soccer, and I don't know. But it's like almost like a bunch of sports mixed into one, right?
I don't know. I think it's the most pure sport. It's there's 2 variations of it. There's 15s rugby and sevens rugby. Those are the number of players on each team that are on the field. 15s rugby requires more technical skill. Sevens rugby requires more speed. Um, Typically, you can only pass the ball backwards, but you can kick the ball forwards. Once you get tackled, a ruck forms over your head where the defense can only get the ball if they get over your body. They can't go around the side. They have to come over your body. So people come over and sort of block. And someone named the scrum half or someone else comes over, grabs the ball from the bottom of the ruck and passes it, and that's the next phase. So there's no plays. Play doesn't stop. It keeps going. Like 80 minutes, like soccer. And the only real stops are when someone drops the ball forward or the ball goes out of bounds or there's, an infraction like a high tackle or something like that. Hands in the ruck, running around the side. But yeah, it's a fun sport. If you're coordinated and you have a gas tank and you're not scared of hitting other people. Tackling is a lot more um, mature than in football. In football, you can use your helmet and your shoulder pads as weapons. You can hit higher. Rugby, if you tackle like football, you're not going to last very long at all. Um, you have to tackle, below the knees is advisable. It's not a game of inches like football. It's a game of possession. So if the guy falls forward a yard, no big deal. You're just trying to get him to the ground. So you don't have to really push him backwards necessarily unless he's right on the goal line.
That's pretty wild, dude. Yeah, I just know, and you know, obviously I'm a big football fan. So, Jordan Mailata is one of the best left tackles in all of football, and he was a 7th-round pick from Australian rugby, just a big fucking rugby player, and they turned him into one of the best offensive tackles in football. The Eagles have arguably one of the best position coaches in probably all of sports. He just, whatever he does to the fucking offensive line people that he trains, they just always turn out good. Like, we never have an issue with that. But he's probably one of my favorite players on our football team, just because he's just a genuine person. But he is large. Like, I couldn't imagine, like, if you watch old videos of him playing rugby, I would have just quit. Like, I would have just ran the other way. Like, you do not want to get hit by that guy running. He's just a big man, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, go on. So you tore your patellar tendon a second time.
Yeah, well, that's way later on in the story. But
Okay.
the first time I did it, you know, when you're an undiagnosed bipolar and you're dealt with trauma, manic episodes tend to happen. And so that was my first ever, you know, as far as I know, manic episode. There are times in the past that it could have been, you know, characterized as that. But I quit my 6-figure job in cybersecurity sales. I quit rugby. I was broken up with, and I moved to Idaho and kind of just traveled across the West for a while. I stayed with my best friend who was building a canoe to paddle from Montana to the Gulf of Mexico.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah,
That's
so I helped him for a while. Then we went on a road trip. I was still recovering from my ruptured patellar tendon, and I tried to hike rim to rim to rim of the Grand Canyon, and I nearly died. You can read about that in my book. But then, you know, I ended up returning home, got a job at a cybersecurity startup, and I was making $250,000 by the age of 26. You know, I moved to a farmhouse which had like an indoor pool with a volleyball court with lights. You know, we had all these amenities, and in the back there was a big barn with different horses that were stalled out by, like, you know, different renters. And this one particular renter, you know, he was from Oklahoma. He robbed us over a dozen times. He threatened to kill us. He got us stuck in the middle of a domestic violence dispute between him and his girl. He had stolen her horses and her car and her cell phone, and she thought he was going to hurt the horses. So I was like, I got to move out of here. And I moved to Boston. Boston was kind of where my illness really started to emerge, in a really concerning way. You know, I was doing incredible in my vocation. I was making just so much money, but you know, I was starting to experience extreme paranoia. Like, I thought my Amazon Echo was listening to my business deals.
I mean, it might.
Yeah,
It might, but probably not in the way you thought.
yeah. And then my car got stolen, and I assumed it was by the Boston Mafia, and they're out to get me. And then one time I spilled soda on the floor, and I went across the street, and instead of buying paper towels, I bought 12 copies of the Boston Globe to clean it up.
Jesus.
Yeah, so
That's like some what movie was that? The Adam Sandler movie where he just cleaned the kid,
Big Daddy.
Big Daddy, where he just he just puts newspaper down. That, yeah, 100%.
Yeah. And my substance abuse habits had been spiraling out of control, so I kind of decided, even though I was making so much money, that I should move back home to Connecticut to my parents' house. And then, you know, things definitely didn't improve, and, you know, I ended up, you know, quitting my job, like, impulsively, manically. Um, you know, I basically figured, like, I can't have a job if I'm going to figure out what's going on in my brain. So I spent the next year reading about 300 pages of literature per day, morning till night, infinite jest in like a week and a half. It was my first real era of like proclivity when it came to reading, because I didn't want to be in my world, so I was escaping to other people's worlds. But at the end of that year, I was trying to apply back to jobs. I was applying unrealistically to companies like, trying to manage the Bank of America account for Google and stuff like that. And I got pretty distraught. And on the last day of April in 2021, I attempted suicide. I put a rope around my head, a noose, and I looked outside, and the sun kind of came out of the clouds, and I realized in that moment that my good friend was getting married the next day, and I didn't want to like ruin it for him. So, I put it down and I went to the wedding, and it's just amazing the little things that people do for you when you're struggling. Like, they have no idea the impact, but grabbing you a drink or dancing with you on the dance floor, stuff like that just went a long way. Um, you know, and so when I told you earlier that I had quit rugby, I mean that I had thrown it completely out of my life. That meant some of my closest rugby friends. And I got invited to a birthday party. This was a week after the suicide attempt, for an old rugby teammate. And, I hadn't seen these guys in 4.5 years. Um, I didn't want them to see me because I had been their captain with endless confidence. And now, I was coming off a suicide attempt, hadn't worked in a year. But I decided to go, and, they tell me that our old college coach is now coaching the men's team, the Hartford Wanderers, and they told me to come to an exhibition match the following week. So I go to this match, don't want to talk to anyone, wearing jeans. But the coach's wife is there, and she had been a huge source of confidence for me in college. And she was like, "Tyler, you got to get back out there. You're great." And so I don't know how it happened, but with 10 minutes left in the game, an injury occurred, and I borrowed someone's cleats and shorts and ran on the field. And the first time I touched the ball in 4.5 years, I assisted the game-winning score. So then it was back into my life. 2 weeks
That's
earlier,
pretty wild. They allow that?
it was an exhibition match. It was just a
Ah,
friendly,
okay.
like Hartford versus New Haven.
Okay. They're like,
Yeah, the spring
fuck it,
season.
bring him in.
The spring
The other
se-
team's
plus-
probably like, who the fuck is this guy? Yeah, go ahead if you're bringing
well,
people
the
in
coach
from the
was my
stands.
college coach, so he knew exactly what I was capable of.
Yeah. Well, I mean the other team. Could you imagine, like,
Oh, yeah.
you're like, oh yeah, bring in that guy, and little do they know you were
Yeah,
very
yeah.
good.
Yeah.
It was a smart play. It was a smart play by the coach.
Oh, definitely. But yeah, it was so crazy, and it makes you think, about divinity, because 2 weeks earlier I had a noose around my neck, and then I had new teammates patting me on the back and telling me how great I am, telling me to come to their next match or whatever. So I got back into rugby. I had missed that community. I had missed the goals that come with it. And it was really good until I got hurt. But then serendipitously the next day, the head coaching position opened up for the Eastern Connecticut State University women's rugby team, which is 8 minutes from my house. And they had a week before the season, and if they didn't have a coach in time, they were going to have to forfeit the season. And I didn't have any of my credentials, so I had to basically pull 2 all-nighters to get my, USA Rugby certification, my sexual harassment certification, concussion protocol, like everything. But I did it, and at this point, I hadn't really had real human connection in the last like 5 years, and now I was basically in charge of creating a community for 30 college women that was inclusive and competitive. But I found that I was a natural at it. Um, I worked really hard on preparation and drills, and I worked hard on being a coach that taught them life lessons too. Um, I was doing quite well in cryptocurrency. I'd gotten into that a few years earlier, and I sold some of my tokens, and I bought the team, new balls, equipment, pads, even books and tournament fees. And I was really doing everything I could to help them. We weren't an instant success. We lost to Tufts University 31-0 in the regular season. Tufts had beaten their opponents 132-7 collectively. But after that
Wow.
match, I just got obsessed with film and just studied it like relentlessly. 8, 9, 10 times on half speed. Showed it to the girls. Showed them what every player on Tufts was capable of doing. And we ended up playing them again in the conference championship on their campus. And we knew that we were going to win. We knew how much more prepared we were than they were. And we did. We beat them 29-10. It was awesome. I had gone from attempting suicide to winning a conference championship in my first year coaching collegiate women's rugby. And I felt
That's
like I
awesome.
had built this community that were not just my players, but my friends. And they were so gun ho about rugby that they wanted to keep playing after the season ended. So I registered them for a tournament in New York City, and we trained for an extra month. Had a great time, had a great awards dinner where I painted little paper plate awards for each of the players. Um, and I went into the off season kind of wishing it could keep going. I started a cryptocurrency company during the off season. It was a decentrally owned and operated professional rugby team. Um, Basically, what I was trying to do was change the governance and the decision making of a sports team by democratizing voting powers for like things like who makes a lineup or who makes a roster. So if you were like someone with a rugby accreditation, you would get an NFT, which would give you a certain amount of voting power. And so I got invited to the largest cryptocurrency conference in North America, and I pitched it to all kinds of venture capitalists, technologists, even Elon Musk's brother, Kimball Musk.
That's
And
cool.
yeah, I went manic while I was out there. I guess it was just the excitement and drugs and stuff like that. And, that can be a pretty powerful tool, being manic around, trying to pitch your idea to venture capitalists in a bar at 2 a.m. Like, you talk fast, you think fast, you
It's
just,
like doing a line of coke. I've never done cocaine, but I can imagine that's probably what it's like.
right. Um, so I built a big database of contacts while I was out there, and I was having these grandiose thoughts. I thought I was going to change the world. I thought I was going to be on Sports Center and get a 7-figure investment. And I flew back home and I was still manic. And one of the things about being manic is you're just focused on a goal. You have no risk tolerance. You're unable to think that anything that you do could be bad because you're just so high on yourself. Um, so I basically trusted this guy online with the secret phrase to my cryptocurrency wallet, and he stole four hundred and fifty
Mm.
thousand dollars from me in 15 minutes.
Oh.
Um, and so it gets worse. Um, my parents were away. I started drinking. The next day, I have to coach the women's rugby team in an indoor practice. I was still manic, still out of my mind, completely distraught from losing my life savings. Um, and I yelled at them for the first time ever. I was disorganized and, just all over the place with drills. And they had brought 3 new players that day. So they were really pissed that, the first time I had ever fucked up was, with 3 new people around.
Yeah.
Um, And so, what I didn't know at the time was that their old coach was forming a coup to try and oust me. He had gotten a job, a more, lucrative position at a different rugby school, but realized that wasn't good. So he was trying to lobby with the leadership of our team to get his job back. And so when I screwed up that practice, that was kind of their opportunity, the ones that were kind of on his side. And so they called me into like a leadership meeting, and 3 out of the 4 girls just berated me for an hour, didn't give me the opportunity to talk. And I was really, confused. I didn't understand why they were treating me that way. Like they wouldn't have had a season without me. I messed up one practice when I had lost my life savings. But I
Yeah, it's
left.
fucked up, dude. One fucking, slip and they're like, "See ya, dude."
Yeah. So I left
Wow.
that. I left that meeting pretty pissed and really upset. And I told a girl, and I should have never have done this because you never want to put a young woman in this kind of situation. But I said, if I lose this job, I might kill myself. Um, and, the next day, the human resources department at the university launched an investigation into me. Um, you know, I ended up resigning um, because I didn't want the chance that they might fire me and lose the opportunity to coach at another university.
Yeah.
But I really didn't think that there was any particular rule I had broken, in the university's bylaws, but it was clear that I had lost the support of my team. Um,
That's
so
tough.
that kind of ensued a 6-week period of like extreme suicidal depression. The only time I left my bed was to walk my dog, and I would see illusions of myself hanging from trees. Um, and it was just constantly on my mind. But it eventually gave way to another manic episode, and I kind of figured, well, it's going to be pretty embarrassing when my friends find out I lost this coaching job that I love so much. So I got to find a new coaching job. And I just got in my car and I drove south. I stopped in Nashville, played rugby for a week for the Nashville Grizzlies with my college roommate. And while I was there, found an opportunity to coach U19 boys in the most dangerous neighborhood in America, Orange Mound in Memphis. So I
Yeah,
drove down.
Memphis is tough. Memphis
Yeah,
is not a good place to be.
yeah. So I drove down to Memphis and I got the job. And I had a lot of fun there, like on Beale Street and stuff like that. Um, I looked at the opportunity as a step out of my comfort zone. I looked at it as the opportunity to mentor kids who are in really tough situations in life, surrounded by gang violence and stuff like that. um, but I was suicidal and I was leaving my network of friends and family. So I moved down there, and on my fourth day there I had this tremendous panic attack. Just started gobbling up medication. I had 90-day supply of my meds because I had just moved, and I took like 5 different meds. At this point, I had been cycling through all kinds of medications, and one was an early stage trial antipsychotic that made me gay for 3 months. So that was really
What?
tough. Yeah. Yeah, it was awful. It wasn't even available in pharmacies. I had to pick up the samples from my psychiatrist's office.
Dude, that is fucking wild.
Oh, it was traumatizing, especially in that time of my life because I was struggling so much. And then I also had to figure out what the hell was going on.
Dude, like, yeah, and I can agree with you. Like, I know my stepdad. I mean, my mom would. Well, for one, he could never take his own pills. My mom would give them to him, because she couldn't trust him. And then, because he did some crazy shit. I mean, he's taken like 70 Xanaxes at one time. He's survived. Like, they didn't have to pump his fucking stomach. Like, there's been some crazy times where like he's a tank. I don't know how the fuck he does it, but he was on. He's definitely still has to be on a decent amount of pills. But there's times. I mean, you're. I think the problem, because I was going to be a psychologist. I think the problem is when you're looking at psychiatry and psychology, the psychiatrist really doesn't. They just want to give you meds and kind of get you out of there, right? Whereas a psychologist kind of wants to talk about things. And I think it's tough with bipolar because you 100% can't go unmedicated. But you have to find the right cocktail. And
Mm,
that takes a long time. And then after a while, you have to change it because your body gets used to it, to a certain degree, right? And then you have to play with it. And then you have another transition period. So I know that can play like crazy, yeah, not just with your body, but mentally too.
yeah. Yeah. And, at the time I was only really diagnosed with clinical depression. So they weren't really treating it right. We'd get to the treatment that's later in the story. But, when I took all of these pills, 40, 50 pills, I got severe serotonin syndrome. And so I had to be hospitalized for 3 nights. And so I moved back to Connecticut, was pretty much suicidally depressed for a month before my psychiatrist gave me some advice. And I went to the ER and I just said, look, all I want to do is kill myself. I tried myself before. I've I'm gonna try again. Like, can you help me? And so they stuck me in kind of this place called the Purple Wing, which, just had a lot of like addicts and homeless people like looking for a place to stay for the night. It's a really unruly like hallway of beds. And since I was suicidal, I couldn't keep the curtain closed around my bed, so it was just awful. But eventually, a spot opened up for me across the street at one of the oldest mental hospitals in the country, the Institute of Living, which is a beautiful campus of like, grassy acres and oak trees and old buildings. But obviously, when you're in inpatient treatment, you don't really get to go outside. So my first day there, I sat down with a bunch of psychiatrists and psychologists, and they told me that I was bipolar 1, and they gave me lithium, which is a mood stabilizer, which has saved my life. Um, but when you're an inpatient, you're you don't go there to heal. You go there so that they can stabilize your condition, so that you're not a threat to yourself or to anybody else.
Yeah.
Um, and so I guess that means that the quality of life has to be really poor. I don't know, but it was because there was just nothing to do there. No group activities, no outside. Like I said, the food was poor. You couldn't have your cell phone or shoelaces or a fork. The books were bad. The only TV was controlled by a guy who spoke Spanish. And so there'd be 30 people around the TV and only one guy was understanding it. Uh, there's schizophrenics, there's narcissists who are so unruly, they needed to be tied to beds for medication. My roommate had aphasia, and, I actually got him to talk for the first time in several weeks. Aphasia is when you can't talk because of something, a stroke or a big head injury or trauma. Um, and, he didn't talk a lot, but we formed a friendship, and it can be a really lonely place. No one really wants to talk there. They're too traumatized. But, that was really useful to me, and it kind of opened my eyes of my blessings in life. Like, a lot of these people were suffering a hell of a lot worse than me. And, they never really had opportunities to succeed in life. I'm from a wealthy, white, educated family. I'm athletic and have wit. A lot of these people have just always been ashamed of themselves. So I wanted to help, but I didn't really want to know how. I eventually moved to outpatient therapy, which was like Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. That was a really liberating experience. Getting to eat sugar again, getting to go outside, getting to drink coffee, having group therapy with people that were okay with talking, and
Yeah.
people that were empathetic to your own struggles and saying, some of those girls on that rugby team aren't going to forget who you are, and so that was a really special time for me. I was on antipsychotics, and so I was eating a ton, and we had $20 food vouchers at the cafeteria, which was just great. But, from there, I eventually got my life together. I got a job at the largest cybersecurity company in the world, trained hard to get back on the rugby team, on the rugby field. By the spring of 2024, I was in the best shape of my life. I was doing things that I hadn't been doing in college or ever. I was so excited about the season. And the second game, I ruptured my patellar tendon again, the other one.
Oh,
Um,
not even the same one?
no, the other one. I've matching
Oh,
zippers on my knees.
oh,
Um,
that's
so
rough, dude. That's always my scare. Like, anytime I go back and out and play, I tore mine playing basketball. Anytime I go out to play basketball, I'm always worried because, you don't realize just how much. Well, for me, I also think I tore my hip, my hip, my rotator cuff in my hip because
mhm.
my hip's all fucked. And it's on the same side that I tore my ACL. So I'm always worried because of the compensation that at some point, and I don't play hard like I did when I was, because I'll be 39 this year. I don't play hard like I did when I was, 25, 26. But still, it's always in the back of your mind. I just started running, and in my head, I'm like, fuck, am I just going to take one weird step and, pop, that one's going to pop?
Yeah.
Because you never know, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to focus on knee mobility, because that it does connect to the knee, or sorry, hip mobility.
Yeah.
But back to the story. So I ruptured my patellar tendon and I went manic for the first time since I had been in Memphis before my institutionalization. And so many times in my past, mania really screwed things up. But it can offer superpowers. Like, for the first time in so long, I was no longer ashamed of myself. And I just started opening up the notes app on my iPhone and publishing my life story to Instagram. And I didn't sleep for 3 days and I had to be hospitalized for the mania. But when I got out, I had just like overwhelming support from my friends, like former rugby teammates, all kinds of people that had no idea what I had been through. And so, I kind of sat down and decided to write a book.
That's ballsy, man. And I've interviewed a lot of people at this point, and the people that write about their trauma and their life tends to be the the most impactful type of interviews I do, because you're putting your shit out there, man. There's no sugarcoating it, right? You're writing your life. I mean, I've interviewed a woman who was repeatedly beaten and raped by her husband, and she wrote a book about it. And the first thing I always ask people is, did you find it cathartic, putting everything down and throwing it out there for the world to read?
I think that it's a lot harder to suffer in silence than it is to be authentic with yourself. And the first step is very difficult. Obviously, I had help from Mania, but now that I've done it, I've felt liberated. I've felt heard for the first time in my life. I've felt like I can explain myself to all of those who have been confused about me. And writing is like therapy. Therapy is nothing more than a mirror for your thoughts, and that's what writing is. And I connect with bipolar people with mental illness, people in the field of helping those kinds of people. And it's impactful, right? Like, they really see me as a beacon of hope. And I do tell them that I'm not through a lifelong illness and I still suffer every single day. I'm not suicidal now, but I have suicidal thoughts every day, and there's a difference. But I'm for the most part stable now, and I'm doing what I enjoy doing, and it doesn't matter about book sales. Those things are nice. What matters is changing one person's life or saving one person's life. Because my life could have really gone a different direction. It couldn't very well have been around right now, but everything that I went through has made me into a better person, and a person that is comfortable sharing my story and knows that the world needs to hear it.
Yeah, and it's also not just with the mental illness side, but it's also being a male, right? Because I think, historically as males, a lot of the time it's just shut up, deal with it, be quiet about it. So you also coming out and talking about your struggles, especially as like, I think it is also, there's that line where you're talking about like the jockey guy, right? The guy that plays sports and is athletic. A lot of the times they're the people that, like, come on, man, what do you have to be worried about? But a lot of times with social media, especially, you don't see like the other side of things. Like where, a lot of times you see the smiling and the fun and all that. You don't see the other shit, which is 90% of a lot of these like influencers' lives, and they're miserable, right? But they don't talk about that stuff. And I think that's why you see a lot of this stuff come to a head and people go crazy, or whatever the case is. But I think it's also good. Have you heard from like guys saying thank you for, talking about your story? Because it's got to be it's a taboo situation with men.
Oh yeah, definitely. Um, I hope that I've inspired someone else to write about their journey, because it really can make a difference. But it definitely is difficult for men to come forward with that kind of thing, to even seek help. And my book is basically about what not to do when you have a mental illness before finally doing what to do with the mental
Yeah.
illness. I basically was trying to escape my demons in my mind by finding an adventure or fixating on wealth or rugby or something else, cryptocurrency. Um, but in the end, I was forced to get help. And once I did, it was kind of like, well, what took so long? You know?
Yeah. Um, you know, I always like to ask the what if, and I don't know if you're gonna have an answer for this, but because I always ask myself this, like, what if I didn't go out that day to play basketball and I had not torn my ACL? Would I have not, what would my physicality look like? Because I was in good shape at that point in my life. Do you ever wonder, like, who you'd be if you never ruptured your patella tendon or you didn't have the bipolar disorder?
Yeah. Um, I try not to because it doesn't do you any good.
It's true.
But, um, I had such high ambitions for rugby. It was the first thing I had ever done where I just instantly I touched a ball, I knew that I was great at it, and having to deal with this twice, it can leave me thinking why me a lot. But, at the end of the day, these things have brought me to who I am this present day. And, I'm more mature than I should be at my age. I'm more resilient, I'm more determined, because of all those things. And so I'm really proud of the man that I've become. And, I could play those games of like I do, I'll see younger guys who, make it to a high level that I played with. And, you always have that feeling of something that you lost because it wasn't your fault. But
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
I mean,
why, I'm still chasing the dream. I work hard every day, dreaming of being back on the rugby field. And, the ship has most definitely probably sailed by this point. But, the pursuit of a dream is what makes us human. And it's what makes us get better every single day. And so even if you don't accomplish that dream, you can sit back and say, I give it my best.
well, Tyler, how old are you?
I turned 33 at the end of this month.
Ah, bro, you're good. Talk to me when you're pushed. I'm almost 1 year off of 40. All right, you're good. You're good. I think I deal with a lot of seniors because in my field I deal with a lot of Medicare recipients, right? So, and I think that age is a construct that society has said, oh well, if you're a certain age, you're old. And I think that we need to break out of that because I got to tell you, there's some 60 and 70-year-olds that I know that I've met doing this that they're in better shape than I am. They do more exercise and more shit than I do. So, I think that that's something as a society I think we need to get better with because people are living longer, they're living healthier. I think there's a lot of that now. So to be honest, and I say this to my dad. My dad's 61. He'll be 62, and I say to him all the time, like, look, dude, yeah, like 75 is a new 65, and we're only going to continue to live longer because we're going to get healthier, and with surgeries and medications and, educations, I think humans are just going to constantly start to evolve and live longer lives. So, I think in the past, like, especially when I was a kid, right? You're in your 30s, that was old,
Mm.
right? But I think, like, as you get into your 30s, you're trying to talk to yourself, like, am I old? How do I feel? But I think age is in the eye of the beholder with a lot of that stuff. 33, dude, you're young, man.
Yeah,
I,
I'm
I
still
consider
not.
kids, anyone under 30 is a kid still in my eyes. I don't know how you look at it, but I look at anyone under 30 as a kid because you still don't know what the fuck you're doing. I still don't know what the fuck I'm doing. I'm 38.
Yeah, yeah. But when your rugby teammates were born in like 2007 or something,
Yeah,
and
it's
they're calling you
yeah.
Unc.
Yeah, if I go out and play basketball, sometimes I'll get called an old head, and I remember like calling people old heads, and Yeah, look, I get it, man. From a mental standpoint, it definitely sucks. But as long as you're like you're doing your thing, I think from a sports perspective, that's tough though. Talk to me a little bit about like what would like when you tore or you ruptured your patella tendon. Like, what was that like? Because I know when I tore my ACL, for one, I knew it right away. Like, I just went to go cut. And dude, we were hooping, man. We were playing. I was playing with some of my friends. We were older. They were young kids. We were fucking them up. We were playing good. I went to go fucking do a cut. That's all I did. Non-contact. Boom. Everybody heard my ACL snap. Everybody. Like, ooh, like one of those type things. And I went to the hospital. They did the X-rays and stuff. They didn't say anything was broken. And then when I went to the orthopedic guy, whatever, they're like, yeah, you snapped your ACL. Now I repaired it, so I have a dead man's Achilles as my ACL. But talk to me a little bit about what that was like, because I know for me it was heartbreaking. I was crying when I found out officially that it was tore.
Yeah. Well, a ruptured patellar tendon is visually traumatic. Like a compound fracture when your hand leaves the skin, like your bones leave the skin, like that's visually traumatic. Well, when you
Ooh.
rupture your patellar tendon, your knee goes into your quad. So you definitely, your leg just dangles and you know that something's wrong. And the first time it happened, teammates suggested that it was just dislocated knee, but um, I didn't want them to try and put it back in place. Um, the second time it happened, I knew it instantly, obviously, because I had seen it before. And that was really heartbreaking because I had known what I came back from. I had known that, I came back from two suicide attempts. I came back from another ruptured patellar tendon. Came back from institutionalization, and I worked so hard. I was working out 3 times, per day, from November 2023 to April 2024. And, I had such high hopes for myself for the first time in so long. Um, I posted on my Instagram, the quote from when Kobe Bryant tore his Achilles, and he's like, "How am I supposed to come back from this? I'm 38, blah blah blah." It's a really emotional um, little essay that he wrote, and I just identified with it so much. But it was truly heartbreaking.
It's tough, dude. And and I don't know about you. I mean, there's nothing wrong with me. I don't have a limp or anything, but I feel like you're never the same. Like, I feel like a part of you died when that happened. Like, and maybe it's 2%, maybe it's 3%, maybe it's 5%. But like, I'm still like, I can still run, everything's fine, but you never feel the same. I don't know if you feel that same way. Obviously, you've done it twice, so it's a little different. But I just feel like like my knee has never felt the way it did before.
Yeah. I did come back from it, and I felt like I was playing better than I had ever before. But there are apprehensions on the field going into tackles and cutting in certain directions where
Yeah,
like you just have a second thought, like something can go wrong here. Like before that, it's just like ignorance is bliss, and
yeah,
you're willing to throw your body around. But once it's happened, like I don't care who you are, there's a level of trepidation involved.
yeah. The
Um,
mental side of it is that I wore a brace, like a professional brace that I got fitted on my knee for probably 2 or 3 years.
yeah, I have two braces that I wear right now, but I'm still not back. Like it's been a year and 1 month already, and it's still recovering, which sucks. Like it took a lot quicker last time. But I'm doing all the right things, getting it strong.
How did you have it repaired? So I know, like, for instance, with my ACL, I had two choices. It was they take part of my hamstring and fish it through, or use just a dead person's thing. And my doctor told me, he's like, look, if we do that, the recovery is longer if you use your hamstring, and then also if that happens again, you can't do the hamstring again. Like, what do they do for the patella?
Yeah, so it depends on how it's ruptured. Occasionally they do borrow from the ACL, but not with mine. It was a clean cut. So basically, your patellar tendon is held in place by these rubber bands, let's call them, and my rubber band snapped. So they needed to drill 3 holes into my patella bone and weave the tendon back through.
That's rough, man. Listen, I don't, and I felt bad. I don't know if do you watch basketball?
Yeah,
Did you watch the Celtics game where
I
Tatum
saw it.
fucking dude, you knew immediately. You knew immediately it was an Achilles, but it's always hard to see someone. I mean, he put up 42 points. It's always hard to see someone at the top level.
Yeah.
And you saw there was a lot of Achilles tears in basketball this year. And I don't know if there's some sort of reasoning behind that, but you have a lot of these explosive moves. The game's different. I'm a big basketball fan. The game's basketball is different now than it was before. It was a lot slower back in the day. So I think you saw more ACL tears because you saw maybe more cutting. Now there's a lot more explosive plays, right? There's a lot more people moving, and you're just seeing those Achilles. But one thing I do know is I had a buddy tear his Achilles, and they said with an Achilles tear, it's a lot different because a lot of times your Achilles comes back stronger. It's like 110% because of the way that they repair it. So, I mean, it's I think it's a little different than knee injuries. I feel like they're never like, oh, your knee's going to be better than it was before. Most of the time it's like we hope that it's just as good, maybe a little bit less than it was before. But doctors sugarcoat shit, so they're not gonna fully tell you either. Now, look, you've had a lot of shit kind of happen, right? Between your crypto experiences, obviously your different manic episodes. What made you keep going? Like, I know you had your suicidal attempts, your suicidal thoughts, things like that. But at the end of the day, it didn't happen. What drove you to continue to just live and try to be better?
Um,
If you can answer, I know that that's not the easiest question, especially, because you're still kind of in the thick of it a little bit, right? To a certain degree.
yeah, no, I mean, some of it was guilt, like the first one. Um, but something, and some of it was luck. But even on my darkest, most suicidal days, and I don't know if everybody has this same thought or if it's my own like egotistical, slightly narcissistic, brain. But even on my darkest days, I thought that there was a chance that I might change the world, you know. And I've always been competitive, and I always just want to prove myself. And I think, I just had more fire in my belly. I wasn't ready.
It takes a lot, I think, to kill yourself mentally. I know, my cousin Chuck, Rip Chuck, he hung himself like you almost did, and he had 2 little girls when he did it, and I want to say he was very high on, I don't know if it was meth or I forget what it was, but it's tough, especially when you have kids, and that was a shitty funeral, dude. That was not fun to attend because he was young. I think he was his early 30s. He was younger than you, but I think you don't realize just how much people care about you until, well, you're not around to see it. You know, but it is a difficult thing, I think, to fully go through. I forget what the statistics are. I think it's like, men do a lot of planning, but a lot of times we fall through. But women, once they decide on it, they're more likely to follow through. Or I forget what the statistic is on that, but it's something pretty crazy. It's like,
Yeah, but men are 75% of suicides, and women are 25%.
okay, so it's they plan it but don't do it, and we don't plan it, we just do it. I forget. It's something like that. It's like where there's like a change in thoughts on how it is. How do you think that the writing your memoir and publishing it, like, how do you feel like that? Did that help heal you in a way?
Um, it brought me a community that doesn't think I'm Frankenstein. You know, like if you're struggling, like you just think other people think the worst of you.
Yeah.
Um, and you know, this has brought me a lot of confidence. You know, random strange. I published a short story. I published the first draft of my memoir to Instagram, and ever since then, I publish a short story or an essay every single day. And you know, the feedback I just get is incredible. You know, strangers will read 10 pages. You know, like um, young rugby guys, a decade younger than me, will pre-order my book, and it's just been really good for my psyche, and it's um, made me want to keep going and keep doing better and come up with new things to write. And like I said before, community is so important when you're struggling. So it's brought me that. Part of it has been cathartic, and um, it has taught me stuff about myself and stuff about what others might have been thinking in certain situations around me. um, but the whole thing has just been a blessing.
So, you know, what's the most misunderstood part of living with a mental illness? You know, especially bipolar. Bipolar's very what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to say random, but it's very sporadic, right? You don't really know what side, because it's going to be either severe depression or severe manic to a certain degree. So, is there anything that you want people to know? You know, that's kind of misunderstood.
We have superpowers. um, it's no wonder why people like Winston Churchill, Vincent van Gogh, Ernest Hemingway, Selena Gomez, have bipolar. We have heightened levels of creativity, curiosity, empathy, objectivity. When we're manic, we're determined, we're unabashful, we have tons of energy. Um, it's easy to look at the glass half empty, but um, we have a lot to look forward to about ourselves. And it's best to avoid the kryptonite and just focus on what you're good at. I'm creative and I'm curious, and that makes for a good writer, and so I'm leaning into it. But so many people look at bipolar as just like this curse, this death sentence, and it can be. But it's so much more than that, and it brings out some of the most unique individuals in the entire world.
Yeah, I would agree. And I mean, I think that's life, though, right? It's like, you know, how you handle your situation. I think what makes us human is how you take your situation, whether start to finish, right, and who you come out on the other side. Because we all have a choice at the end of the day. We all have free will, if you, right? If you believe in that, some people don't. But if you believe in that, then you know, yeah, everyone has shitty days, everyone has shitty years, and some of us has longer than that, and shit happens, right? But that's life. And I think what makes us human is who you come out on the other side. And obviously for you, you had a lot of turmoil, you had a lot of shit happen to you, but you came out on the other side, you know, and I like that you said, I'm better. I'm not better, right? You said, I'm still working on it. And I think that type of mentality is good, because you're always going to be working on it. And I think when you had talked about this, but when you're bipolar, it's not something that they cure, at least not yet, right? You never know with Elon Musk and chips in your brain and stuff. Who knows? Maybe in the next 10, 15 years, maybe we won't have the ability, or we will have the ability to do that. Um, Before we hang this up, I do have a lot of younger guys that listen to this show. Um, what would you say to someone listening right now who feels like they're on the edge, whether that's mentally, emotionally, financially, whatever? What would you say to them?
Um, well, we're pretty social creatures. Um, it's really easy with an illness to disassociate yourself from the world, not talk to friends and family, not tell them about your troubles or what you're going through. Um, but for me, I couldn't do it myself, and most of us can't. And it's a lot easier to have a team behind you that you care about, that cares about you. It's important to find your community. It's important to find your goals in life. Stuff that gets you trying to get better each day. And it's important for people that are truly suffering with a mental illness to find that medication that fits. And that can be a tough thing to attack because it's difficult to diagnose psychiatric illnesses. But I found it eventually, and it did save my life. And um, I'm able to do stable enough things like write a book because I finally asked for help.
I like that. I like that. And let's end with this. What's next for you, man? You working on something right now? You got another memoir, and then tell us where everybody can find your content, your book, all that jazz.
Yeah, sure. I mentioned
Plug
that
away.
Huh?
Plug away, man.
Yeah. I mentioned that I wrote some short stories on my Instagram. Well, I've actually written over 200 of them. 99 of which are going into a second book called 99 Stories in a Broken Pen. I think that my writing has continued to develop quite a bit since my first book. And, it covers a range of topics, suicide, addiction, overdoses, but also sports, friends, family, funny stories, some really funny stories. And so I'm editing that now. I'm always looking for the next good story to kind of plug in there. But it should be available sometime in the fall. And then besides that, I write extended obituaries for people, basically like short 12-page books about the lives of a deceased loved ones for families and friends to preserve their memories and legacy. I work with funeral homes to try and find families. But if you're interested in seeing my short stories, like I said, I post one a day on Instagram. My handle is at Tyler_Kania. And if you liked what you heard about my story today, you can buy my book, The Maniac with No Knees, on Amazon.
Yeah, I just followed you on Instagram, and it's The Maniac with No Knees. Let's see what you're. All right, man. And you do have an Audible version.
Yeah.
All right, well, I'll tell you what, dude, because I always support everyone. I just bought your book on Amazon.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, man, I believe in what you're doing. Keep spreading the good word. I appreciate, you coming on, being your authentic self. I think it's important, especially if you're listening to this, if you have a mental illness, you're struggling, whether you're male, female, they, them, whatever, right? Ask for help. I think it's important. If you have a significant other, talk to them about this. If I didn't have my wifey, I'd probably not be where I am today. She's a great person I can pitch things to and talk about how I'm feeling. And a lot of times you could be your authentic self with the person you're spending the rest of your life with, right? Too. I think that's important. So my podcast is Drink Clock Pod on all socials. Drink Clock Podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts. And hey man, it was awesome having you on, Tyler. Let's do this again. Maybe after your next book, dude.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Awesome, man. Thank you very much. You have a great night.
You too. Bye.
On a stormy night where legends unfold, there's a podcast that's breaking the mold. Raise your voices, raise your glass high. Welcome to the Drink O'Clock Podcast. Let's dive. Oh, grab an old fashioned and join the fray. Raise your spirits, let the music play. From the corner pub to the dance hall floor. Drink O'Clock Podcast, we're ready for more. We're ready for more. With a mix of folklore and rebel cheer here, we'll guide you through tales of whiskey and beer. From Irish shores to lands afar, grab your friends, it's time to raise the